Hey everyone, and welcome as we continue our study through the New Testament Gospels, looking at the 250 events in the life of Jesus. We're studying it in chronological order, and today we're looking at Jesus is the Good Shepherd, and Jesus talks about how he is the Good Shepherd. And this comes from John 10, verses 1 through 21. Now, I'm not going to go through this, like, I try to go the smaller ones verse by verse. This one, it's 21 verses, so please take the time to, pause, go and record, and read this, and then we can we'll go through it together. But what we're looking at here is, if you looked at yesterday's video, Jesus was talking about those who are spiritually blind, and he kind of calls out at the end of that section, he calls out the Pharisees and religious leaders for their spiritual blindness, and the reason they're blind is because they claim that they're not, and that's why they're guilty for who they are. And so then he rolls into John 10, and this is the same conversation ongoing. And he says, "I tell you the truth, anyone who sneaks over the wall of a sheepfold rather than going through the gate must surely be a thief and a robber. But the one who enters through the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep recognize his voice and come to him. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. After he has gathered his flock, he walks ahead of them, and they follow him because they know his voice. They won't follow a stranger. They will run from him because they don't know his voice." And then he goes on to talk about, uses this illustration about being the good shepherd, and how he's the gate, and he stands in front of them, and guards them, and that he's not a hired hand, right? He loves his sheep, and he guards his sheep, and that how the Father loves him, and because he sacrifices his life for the sheep. And he says at the end, verse 18, says, "No one can take my life from me. I sacrifice it voluntarily, for I have the authority to lay it down when I want to, and also to give it up and take it up again. For this is what my Father has commanded." And then the people go into, is he a saint? Is he a prophet? Some say he's got to be a prophet. Some say he's demon possessed. And so they have this little discussion back and forth here. And so what we see here is the claim that Jesus is the good shepherd, and he's speaking to these people in this language because they understand what a shepherd is and what it means to be a shepherd. And so what would happen is, at night, right, the sheep were often gathered into what was called a sheepfold to protect them from thieves, weather, wild animals, that kind of stuff. And a lot of times they were either like they could be caves, they could be sheds. They may be open areas surrounded by walls. We would call them almost like a corral type thing today, but it would have been made of either wood or stone. Most of ours are made of metal. And so what would happen is there would be an entrance into one of these caves, these sheds, whatever they had. And so what the shepherd would do is the shepherd would sleep across that doorway to protect the sheep. That way, no predator would come in, or if they did try to come in, they had to go through the shepherd. And so, just as the shepherd loved and cared for the sheep, Jesus, who is the good shepherd, cares for his flock, those who follow him, his followers. And in the sheepfold, right, the shepherd functioned as a gate. And so Jesus talks about him being the gate, they were the ones that would let the sheep in, and he would protect them, just like Jesus, right, is the gate and to God's salvation for us. He's the one he's the only way we can get in, and he protects us. And we talk about, in the sense of, like, someone can't just come and take your salvation, because Jesus paid the price for it, right? He as long as you stay faithful in him, it's there. He paid the price. He owns it. And so that's what he's getting at. And so, in the contrast to that, right, you have the thief who takes life. He talks about the thieves, those who would come and try to steal, but Jesus gives life, right? And the life he gives right now is abundantly, it's rich, and it's full. It's eternal, and it begins immediately. And that's what we have to understand, is like, once we give our lives to Christ, that's eternity starts then, right? We have it right then. And so we need to make sure we focus on that. And so he talks about hired hands, right? He's not like the hired hands, because the hired hands would tend the sheep for money, right? They didn't, but the shepherd does it out of love. And so the shepherd owns the sheep, and are committed. They are his sheep, right? Hired hands don't really care. They're getting paid for it. And it's like, okay, they're not going to be as committed as the shepherd who owns and loves them. And so Jesus, he's saying here, he's like, I'm not merely doing a job, right? I'm committed to loving you, loving us, and laying down his life for them. And so you had these false teachers and false prophets. They didn't have this commitment. They weren't committed like Jesus was, right? And he talks about the other sheep that's going to come in. And so when he says the other sheep, he's talking about the non-Jews. And so Jesus was giving that foreshadowing, talking about how he also came to save the Gentiles as well, not just the Jews. And so this is an insight into his worldwide mission. He's talking about his worldwide, and this is to die for the sins of the entire world. He's not just coming and dying for the Jews, he's dying for the sins of the entire world. And so he hits on that because people tend to want to restrict God's blessing to their own group. It's like, and that can be in many ways. It can be a cultural thing, like the Jews, right? Or the Jews thought they were the only ones that would receive the Messiah. We have different church groups sometimes that think, well, we are the ones who have the knowledge, the true knowledge, and the keys to the kingdom, and we're the only ones going to heaven. And this group over here is not going because they do this differently than we do. And this group, so you get that little, and Jesus saying that it doesn't work that way, right? Some particular church group doesn't have the keys to the kingdom, or some particular group people doesn't have full control of the keys. It's Jesus who has control, right? He's the one that stands at the gate, and he's going to be the one to decide who goes into heaven and who doesn't. And so we need to be careful not to get caught up in that. Say, oh, we're the ones that right. We're the ones that are right. We're the ones going to heaven, and you're not. That's not for us to decide, right? And so people try to restrict God's blessings to their own group, but Jesus refuses that, right? And he refuses to be limited by a bunch of fences that we try to build up. And so Jesus' death and resurrection is part of the plan of salvation of the world. We're under God's full control. And that's where we have to understand this. This whole thing was under God's full control. Jesus controlled the whole thing. We see many times where they would try to kill Jesus, and Jesus would say, well, it wasn't his time yet. It wasn't, his time hadn't come. And so the simple fact is Jesus was going to die exactly when he wanted to die, and that's it. It was going to happen then. And so no one could kill Jesus without his consent, that he had to allow it to happen. And if Jesus had merely been a man who he claimed to be, right, his claims to be God would have proven him insane. Now, and I've talked about this many times. If Jesus really was just a human being, then he was nuts. He was absolutely insane. And none of his stuff would have proved out. And that goes to show, right? And that's one of the things I love about, like, if you look at his followers before his crucifixion and then after his crucifixion and resurrection, like a lot of them weren't that committed. Some were, right? A lot of them were still learning. Some of them were kind of on the fence. And so, because you have to understand, this guy was claiming things that were truly crazy if they weren't true. Absolutely nuts. And so they were still following because they saw who he was, what he was doing, the things that he was doing. And then if he had died and not resurrected, these people would have not made that up. They wouldn't have made up, they wouldn't have gone and stolen a body and tried to prove that he did resurrect because he said all these crazy, outlandish things. They would have gone like other people in that day. I mean, that's the one thing we've got. If you study your history, there were several people who came and claimed to be the Messiah or some kind of savior, and ultimately a lot of them were killed, and then their followers dispersed and went away. And so with this one, right, we see that didn't happen. And in fact, his followers were so committed after his resurrection because they saw him resurrected, that they were willing to die for him. Now, you got to think about this. If this man was true, if Jesus truly was nuts and not who he said he was, and then he died, and then he didn't resurrect, but his followers were like, oh man, we got to make him resurrect. And it's like, okay, maybe. But then it would, to get to the point where, hey, yeah, we made the whole thing up, and we're going to keep this movement going, even though you're trying to kill us, and you're going to torture us, and you're going to do all these things, but we're still going to stay committed. No one's going to do that. No one's going to stay committed to a lie like that. And so that just shows how, how we can have confidence in the truth of the story that we see here. And so the other thing is if he had been a demon possessed, he couldn't have healed the blind man we just looked at. We've been studying about. And so his miracles, right, his stories, the eyewitness testimony we have from so many people, right, and his miracles prove that he truly was who he said he was, that he was God. And so all these things would not have happened if, all this stuff would not have happened if he wasn't who he said he was. And the timing, no person, no human being could have come and timed his death and his resurrection, or let's just say timed his death to the exact point where it ended up being. And so there's just no way. I mean, you look at everything that falls in line, how it parallels everything with the Exodus, and there's just so many prophecies that he fulfilled and all this stuff. It's just literally impossible for him to have done all this as a human if he wasn't God. And so this goes back to the whole lesson in this, is that Jesus is the good shepherd, right? And those of us who are follow his followers, are his sheep, right, are his followers, are, you know, we don't have anything to worry about. He's going to protect us. Now, we do have to keep an eye out for those who are going to come and try to hurt us, try to destroy us. But in the end, all they can do is harm our physical body. They can't take our salvation away. They can't, you know, they can take us maybe from this earth, but they can't harm us spiritually, right? Only if we let them. Like, unless we let people drag us away from Christ, there's no way, right? I shouldn't say drag us away, lead us away from Christ, because no one's going to be able to just drag you and drag you away from Christ. But someone can lead you away, right? And so, but we have to be careful not to leave his protection, leave who he is, because that's who he is. Now, we know we're going to look at it. Once we do leave, if we do walk away, if we do leave, he's going to come after us. He's going to try to, get us to come back. But that's a whole nother lesson for a whole other time. We can go all that down. But I just want us to understand who Jesus is and how we are secure in his salvation and who he is, as long as we continue to follow him, because he is the good shepherd. He is going to take care of those who follow him. As always, I appreciate everyone for tuning in and listening. If you haven't shared this with anyone, share, make comments. I appreciate the comments that we get. But if you have comments, questions, and even if it's things that you don't agree with me with, I love that kind of conversation. Those things that we can say, hey, obviously cordial and Christian like, but say, hey, this is my point of view on this, or this is. I love that kind of discussion, and that kind of diving deeper into things. If you haven't subscribed to our channel, please go ahead and do so. We're going to continue to put out as many videos as we can. And as always, I appreciate everyone for watching.